Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are advised that this film contains images of people who have passed.
Life on the goldfields 100 years ago was not only about mining. As the population grew, there was time for days at the races, cycling clubs, billiards, and beer. Lots of beer. There were fancy dress occasions for the young and photo ops for a pre-Instagram era. And of course, there were weddings. Weddings have always been special occasions, but Clara Saunders' wedding in Coolgardie was something else. In 1893, Clara was living in Southern Cross with her mother and sister when she was offered a job at a pub in Coolgardie. Everyone warned her about the bad conditions and that this was no place for a young girl on her own, but
Clara was a very adventurous young lady, and at 17 she decided, yes, that sounds a great idea, I'm going to do it. So she travelled to Coolgardie and she started work at the Exchange Hotel. Very popular young girl, very pretty. And after a little while, they got a customer, and he was called Paddy Hannon. He was very sick, he had no money, and she took pity on him and she said, look, there's no accommodation here at the hotel, but I'll move in with one of the other maids and you can have my bed. And while she was there, she looked after him, she brought him food, she got medicine for him. And when he was well, he said to her, you've looked after me so well, I'm going to give you a special gift. And it was a small nugget. And he said, this is the very first nugget that I ever found when Kalgoorlie was discovered. And he says, and I want you to have it. The Exchange Hotel burnt down. So she was offered immediate employment at another hotel called De Bourne's. And at De Bourne's, there was a guy called Arthur Williams who ran a billiard room there. And they fell in love and decided to marry. And of course, in Coolgardie in 1894, no one had ever got married before. There's no churches, and there was just a minister, and he just had a little house. So they thought, right, the first wedding ever in Coolgardie, we are going to have a real big do.
they were married in the Great Western Hotel. Over 500 miners came to witness the unique event, and hundreds more listened outside through windows and doorways.
On Wednesday evening last, the Reverend Mr. Trestrail, Wesleyan minister, joined in the bonds of holy matrimony the first couple that have decided to peg out life's leases together in Coolgardie. Miss Clara Saunders was the lady who acted as pioneer in the matrimonial market for her sweet sisterhood. The bride looked very nice in her robes of sacrifice, and the groom looked resolutely nervous. The bride wore a rich, creamy quartz-coloured silk with orange blossom outcrops.
She had the most beautiful wedding dress, and she said for luck, she had the little nugget that Paddy Hannon had given her mounted on a brooch, and she wore it on her bodice at the wedding.
The party lasted for 2 days. 3 weeks later, the teenage Clara and her new husband packed all their possessions into a wagon and headed north, where, with Clara's lucky Paddy Hannon's brooch in hand, they opened a hotel and billiard room in Coolgardie. More weddings soon followed. Some, such as these newlyweds in Nanine, came up with novel solutions to logistical issues such as transport. But finding a potential partner was not easy for most men. Typhoid was rampant, and basics, even water, was in short supply. Not exactly an environment to attract women, or most men for that matter. As a result, it was reported in 1896 that the ratio on the goldfield was 1 woman for every 10 men. However, some men found a solution: arranged marriages.
Arranged marriages have always been something quite popular in Yugoslav Italian families, and they often, the man would come out to the goldfields, he would get work, he would get himself settled, and then he would write home and say, I would like a wife. And the families would get together and they would pick several young ladies that they thought would suit him, and the girls and he would correspond. They would make an arrangement that she would come out to Australia and marry him. On this one particular occasion that comes to mind, there was a young lady called Annie Sivrin, and she had arranged to marry a young man. She travelled all the way from Yugoslavia. She arrived at the Fremantle port, and she was with several other young girls who were also coming to meet husbands. And they knew that when they got there, they had to go and get married straight away, because you can't just go off with someone who you're not married to. That would just never do. So she got off the boat, and the prospective husband came up and said, "This is who I am," and everything like that. And she looked to the side and she said, "Who's he?" She said, "I want him." So the rejected one stood aside and she married the other man, who was much more handsome.
In terms of fashion, Clara's creamy quartz-coloured silk had set a standard that future brides sought to meet, despite their remote location, costs and harsh conditions. Local tailoresses and seamstresses were soon creating works of beauty. The Eastern Goldfields Historical Society holds hundreds of images by Goldfields photographer John Joseph Dwyer. Through the lens of Dwyer and his successors, we can see the results of the hard work and creativity of these women over the next 50 years. The headdress alone for this 1920s bride takes over 4 hours to make even now. And the dress would have taken days, with the tailoress and seamstress working the early hours before it became too hot, and their perspiration dripped on the material. The dress was beaded and frilled, and the train was a brocade of satin with cotton woven through. The veil incorporated real pearls set in delicate rosettes.
But you'll always see in the early photographs that the man will be seated and the woman will be standing, and it's not a subservient thing, but it's so that you can see her dress, because if she sat down, you couldn't see her dress. So the man would sit and she would stand, and you'd see her lovely dress, and the man would always have his gloves, and he would always have one glove off to show that he was a married man.
But often times were tough, or materials were in limited supply. Goldfields brides and dressmakers had to be innovative and resourceful in using and reusing materials.
A lot of the trains were made from grandma's curtains or a relative's curtains, and they were dragged down. "Oh, I've got this for so-and-so or for Jessica, and we'll use that." And the people are happy with it because it hasn't cost them money. But also the curtains were very beautiful. After the wedding, the curtain is removed from the bride and very hastily hung up where it came from.
A new era of bridal fashions and the style of wedding photography began after World War II.
The wedding dress was my mother's wedding dress. So she was married in January 1948. But after the war, things were in short supply. I know her sister got married in uniform, and other marriages occurred in uniform because that's all people had after the war.
And in keeping with the Goldfields tradition,
when I was married, I wore the same dress.
As for Clara, she and Arthur ran 2 hotels before Arthur died while on a trip back to England. The resourceful Clara then ran the pub in Mount Morgans for 7 years before she married Joseph Lynch. Hard times and a third marriage followed, but she kept the brooch with Paddy Hannon's nugget, and during World War II, for a small viewing fee, would show it in the Perth Town Hall to raise funds for the Red Cross.